Welcome, welcome everyone. We are going to let the room fill up and get started in just a moment. If you are here for the webinar on disrupting industries and how to identify and exploit market gaps, you're in the right place. We will give it a minute or two to let the room fill up. Welcome Ayutunde, Carol, Igor, Kim Tai. If you want to let us know in the chat where you're joining from, we would love to know. Sobra, Noah, Martin, we're happy that you're here and joining us for this webinar on disrupting industries and how to identify and exploit market gaps. It's going to be a good session. We've got some heavy hitters, some fabulous speakers here, and we're really excited that you all have made the time to join us today. Ugona, Sarah, welcome everybody. So I think that we will go ahead and start introducing our speakers. So Fadil and E, if you want to come back on camera, we're really happy to have everyone here. I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers because we have some pretty incredible folks here today to share their firsthand experience in building successful companies, including two of Africa's first unicorns, which is really exciting. So, first I'll go ahead and introduce E. So we have Ian Alua, also known as E, and he's passionate about building a future where prosperity and purpose are within reach for all Africans. So E founded and scaled several category-defining technology businesses in Africa, including two of the continent's first startup unicorns, Flutterwave and Andela. While he was CEO at Flutterwave, he led the company to become one of the fastest growing payments technology businesses of all time, processing over $2 billion across 50 million transactions with annual revenues of millions of dollars a year. So if you are making your resume bullets and you want an example, go back and rewind on this because that's pretty impressive. So before that, he co-founded Andela, Africa's largest engineering organization with over 1,000 software engineers. And for both companies, he raised millions in funding from the world's top investors. Currently, he is the founder and managing partner of Future Africa, and is also a founder of Etana, an investor. We are also joined by Fadil Al-Tarzi, and Fadil and Nexford University, who we're here hosting this webinar today with today, are on a mission to solve the world's biggest challenge, education. As a next generation university, Nexford is set to positively impact millions of lives globally. And our two core principles are a lack of education is the root cause of most global challenges, and people should be able to access economic opportunities irrespective of physical location. Fadil became an entrepreneur at 18 and has over 20 years of experience founding digital marketing and technology businesses. He founded and managed the MENA region's leading digital engagement agency, including if you're on mute, if you're unmuted, you can go ahead and make sure you're muted. Or Shan, maybe you can mute folks. I am not. So thank you so much, including clients from the U.S. State Department, international, and government organizations. So we've had a brief introduction here of our speakers. Our room has filled up. My name is Jennifer Bangura, and I am Nexford University's Director of Career Innovation. And I'm truly honored to be here today with E and Fadil to talk about disruptive businesses and what disruptive innovation really means. So I want to turn it over, and this will be a not totally informal, but informal conversation between our panelists, and we want to know, why is disruptive innovation important in today's business landscape? So E or Fadil, if you want to take it away and tell us a little bit more.
Thanks, Jennifer. E, I'll let you go ahead. You got us started.
You might be frozen in Amsterdam.
All right, let me go first while E figures it out. in thinking about disruptive innovation, I actually think it's important, not necessarily for the purpose of disruption, but for the purpose of improving humanity and society at large, because there are a number of challenges that continue to exist across the world today that really shouldn't exist, to put it simply. So the technology that we have today, the infrastructure that we have today across the world, the human power that we have today, and the intellectual power that exists across the world today is more than enough to solve the world's largest challenges. And therefore, I think from a disruptive innovation perspective, the ability and the potential that we have to leapfrog the entire world forward and to really improve, societies at large has never been as large as it is today. Across pretty much every metric in the world, we're in terms of life expectancy, diseases, education, literacy rates, like all of these challenges can be significantly addressed using the intellectual capacity and the technology that we have today. And then at a more granular level, when you think about things like the unbanked versus the banked, there's just immense amount of technology available today that enables us to solve very significant challenges, and that's why I would say disruptive innovations is pretty critical today. And if you're not in the startup world for an existing business, if you're not in the business of innovation, then you're essentially in the business of getting out of business. So any business that isn't, continuously innovating is just going to cease to exist over the coming 5 to 10 years, I'd say.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, E.
Yeah, I think for me, I echo a lot of what Fado has already said. But I would just add that there are a lot of problems that are impossible to solve using the tools and methods that we have used over the last, say, 100 years. So, for example, a practical example would be education, which is an example of where a business like Nexford comes in. Right, the reality of a 4-year undergraduate degree or a 1-year or 2-year master's degree prior to Nexford was that it cost too much, it took too long, and it didn't guarantee you any actual outcomes in terms of employment. But thanks to an innovation like Nexford, you now for the first time have a situation where you can go to school from wherever you are. Your curriculum is aligned with workplace, but most importantly, you're able to do this at your own pace, whether you want to do this very quickly or you want to take your time. And that's an example of disruptive innovation. But for me, I don't even really like to use the word disruptive because I feel like it's a context that is borrowed from the American and European context where, a lot of things were already built, right? So you could disrupt something. In the context where I work in Africa, most things aren't built yet. So you have the ability to develop or democratize things, but you are really not disrupting very much. If you look at Africa, for example, we have across the continent a 12% participation rate in higher education. So Nexford is not disrupting very much. If anything, it's actually democratizing access to knowledge and skills so that we can go from 12% participation in higher education to something much higher than that.
That's great. And a brief housekeeping following those answers. If everyone can please take a look and make sure you're muted. We had a little snafu and not muting folks before. So thank you for muting your mic to those who are not our panelists. So when you think about, so E, I'm curious, what word would you use if not disrupt? And maybe it's not a word, but think about, and we're looking to examples from the continent, from other countries. four continents. Who are some people that you've seen, both of you, Fadl and E, who have been successful at disrupting or from the foundation being innovators?
Rather than disrupting, I prefer to use the word democratizing, right? So rather than disrupting, I prefer to use the word democratizing. And what that means is that you are essentially providing access to something that was impossible to provide access to before, to even more people. So if we again use the example of higher education, you know, you have a situation where there are about roughly, you know, say hello, can you hear me? Okay. There are about 17,000 places in a university, and out of those, 1.7 million spaces in a university, and every year university probably has space for about 400,000, but you have over 1 million kids writing JAM. So how do you expand access to those who are left behind? 600, 700,000 who are left behind. And that's where, you know, an online university can be democratizing. I think, like I said, disruptive comes from a context, as in the West, where, you know, you already had century-old universities where people went for decades and were generally accessible to at least a ton of elite society. And then you had to disrupt it to provide access to others. But in the context of markets, there isn't actually very much to disrupt. Perhaps another example would be the business we're building called Itana, right? So we are essentially building digital governance platform that enables people who want to build their business from Nigeria to go global to be able to do so, like a Delaware for Africa. Now, there's nothing to really disrupt because you're not in a situation where these people who want to actually build a global business from Nigeria, they have no existing alternatives. Maybe at best, those who are most well connected amongst them can then go and incorporate a company in the US online. But then there's a lot of maintenance costs a lot of people don't think about when they set those things up. Filing your annual returns, a lot of people are delinquents in doing those, you know, and things like that. And very soon those chickens will come home to roost. So why not have a service that provides all those to you in one bundle, including the insurance you need, including the accounting support and tax filing support you need, including logistics support on the ground, including where to place your office and so on and so forth. Again, that's not disrupting, that's democratizing access to, you know, the right governance mechanisms for building your business. So those are just two good examples that give you a sense of how we see market opportunities with respect to disrupting versus democratizing.
To add to E's comments, Jennifer, I think, you know, if we want to look at other examples, I think M-Pesa is a fantastic example in Kenya, just like Flutterwave is, you know, in Nigeria and now in other markets as well. So to E's point, you know, the difference, I think, between disruption in markets like, say, the US versus Africa, another term could be almost leapfrogging or enabling in Africa. So if you think about before, you know, mobile payments were available, you know, how people would actually make their payments and how difficult that process was, and the reliance on cash and the cost of, you know, using cash from a safety perspective, infrastructure, and just, you know, enablement and speed of transactions. So you think about, you know, small shops on streets all over the streets of Nairobi or Lagos or Abuja, being able to transact today, get bill payments, whether for electricity or for phones or for internet, and make commissions out of those payments. The volume of transactions has gone up very significantly as a result of mobile payments. It also addresses issues like corruption and bribery in some instances where you have basically digital trails of payments. So you're just enabling access to services in a way that sort of 10x the previous infrastructure. So it's not necessarily disrupting traditional banks, but if you had 10% of society actually using any form of digital payment, now all of a sudden that 10% becomes 30% within a few weeks. For traditional banks to have accomplished the same, it would have taken them many years. So it really, I tend to like the term, leapfrog, because to E's point, rather than go through the same evolution that, say, a market like the US or the UK went through over a 100-year period to get to where they are today, for instance, on digital payments, Africa has this fantastic opportunity to actually do it in 5 and almost go from nothing to the most modern. Simplest analogy, I think, is internet, right? If you don't have internet each day in a location, you're not going to go through dial-up. For those of you on the call that remember, the old sort of dial-up, connections, and then DSL, and then sort of, broadband, and then eventually, fiber and so forth. You're going to maybe go from nothing to 5G directly. So that's, a great example of, I think, leapfrogging, which can be, portrayed as disruption, but ultimately you're just enabling mass access much quicker.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thinking about, you both have built successful companies, you're currently building them. You are looking for them as you build them to invest from the venture capital perspective. You're thinking about identifying market gaps. Could you tell us all, what is a market gap, and what are some of the strategies that you all are using for identifying them? And maybe we can start with you, E, from your perspective, like the 30,000 foot, and then Fadl, you'll bring us in a little more granular from Nexford's perspective.
Absolutely. I used to have this, and I still do, this old Jewish CEO who used to mentor me, and he would say, market gaps make market caps, right? So essentially, a lot of businesses are built off the back of market gaps. Now, I have a process for identifying a market gap, and it's very literal, which is I have multiple conversations with people, and I try to understand what they badly wish existed, but have already resigned themselves to believing is not possible. So, a lot of people, when we started Andela, we used to ask this very popular question to people who signed up for the program, which was, what's your dream salary? And they would say 150,000 Naira is their dream salary. And we'll say, well, that's doable. And what we realized was a lot of young people wanted to earn well doing a job they loved. And that wasn't going to happen in banking. That wasn't going to happen in insurance or something like that, with these typical corporate jobs that have a ladder and you have no control over your time or your outputs. The ways it was going to be able to happen was by people being able to learn skills that were globally valuable, not just valuable within one geography. Because 150,000 Naira for, a software engineer in a country where, broadband penetration is less than 30% sounded ludicrous. And we took it upon ourselves to then develop a business around that market gap, gainful employment that pays decent wages. And that's how Andela was born. Same thing with Flutterwave, right? When we were building Flutterwave, it seemed like we were going after a saturated market. But because we had sat down and spoken to small business owners, we heard something that most people must have heard, but even they did not clearly think about, which was, we do not want to accept different payment methods and incur the cost of accepting different payment methods separately. Whether that cost is in terms of integration or buying a machine or dealing with multiple different fees and reconciliations. We want one platform that can allow us to get paid however the customer wants to pay, right? And we will receive it in our bank accounts the following day, or in cash as the case may be, if they are agents. And by just understanding that, you understand, we're able to then build a $1 billion company simply by aggregating all these different payment methods on behalf of merchants so they could use them. So a market gap is something that seems impossible, right? to fulfill, right? But is the object of your customer's desire. And yeah, that's what I've learned this past decade. And I take very seriously people who want to solve seemingly impossible problems that everybody has already accepted would always remain with us, finding innovative approaches to solving those problems.
Fadl, you're out here solving impossible problems. People told you, it will take you 10 years to get accredited, and now Nexford University is an accredited and licensed university in the United States, based in Washington, D.C. So what has your experience been in building your companies and identifying these market gaps, and then how you're continuing to address them as the company evolves?
For us, I think it started with a wider objective, and this may or may not work for different founders on the call today. For us, the starting point was impact to begin with. So we wanted to see, okay, we want to deliver positive impact, social impact. And so that was sort of an initial filter. From that filter, we started thinking, okay, what are the problems that exist today, and use this formula of what is the common denominator across many of these problems. And then from there, started thinking about, okay, what can be a solution to that common denominator? So that's an approach that some folks can take as well. Whether it starts with impact or not is a different story, but ultimately, if you're solving a lot, this common denominator approach tends to result in the next important element, which is sort of addressable market size. So in solving a specific problem or in identifying a specific market opportunity, you want to make sure that it's a sizable issue. Like there are many people, and millions of people actually facing this specific challenge, and that's why it's an opportunity that's worthwhile. So for us at Nexford, it was starting with impact, then lack of access to high quality yet affordable education is the common denominator across many of these challenges across the world. And then from there, we identified the specifics. So for us, there were two specifics. One is people want access to high quality yet affordable education, and that's just not accessible. The second is they want education that's relevant. So education that's actually gonna help them move forward in life, whether it's in terms of getting a promotion or getting a new job or changing careers. So these were the two problems that we set out to solve. And to E's point, the next step was going out and talking to the market, and that's a critical step, obviously, in validating one's idea and identifying whether the market opportunity is real. Is talking to potential customers and understanding, is that a real pain point they're solving? For us, it became very, very clear very quickly that all across the world, people are essentially having to pick between one of two buckets. The skills is one bucket, and credentials is another bucket. So they need the skills in order to progress in their careers, but they want the credentials because they have social value and employers recognize the value of a credential. Credential meaning like a bachelor degree or master's and so forth. So why can the two not be obtained under one umbrella? So if folks are going to traditional universities, for example, getting the degrees, but then going out trying to get a job and finding they don't have the skills, so they have to continue learning more. So for us, we set out to combine the two. But that same logic can apply to many other industries, where you identify, okay, what is the real problem, folks are solving today. And what I would just add here is, I think it's really important for founders to think about, am I improving an existing process, or am I attempting to change consumer habits? Because the two are very different in terms of how difficult it is to actually go to market. So in the payment example or an education example, the habits were there. People were going to university if they could afford it, but there were a lot more people who could not afford it. So we weren't necessarily looking to completely change. So we weren't telling them, hey, instead of going to university, go do something else, something completely different. We were telling them, here's a more convenient, more effective way to go to university. Same with like a Flutterwave, for example. People were always paying, right? Person A buys something from person B, but here's a much more convenient, fast, efficient way to do that. So you weren't altering behavior completely, you were just making it a lot more efficient to do something people already wanted to do.
That's interesting. And from looking at past stories and hearing you talk about this, I mean, you were solving problems on both sides of the coin, because my understanding is, you founded Nexford when you had your other companies and you couldn't find the talent to fill your companies. And at the same time, you're filling the side, of employers who need qualified talent, but also people who are wanting to become that qualified talent and aren't able to find ways to do so. So is that, it feels like you're solving has that been, I don't know.
I think
how do you feel?
I think the only way in which that helped, or primarily, is because I experienced the problem myself. And I think to all founders on the call today, like, you have to really think about, have you experienced this problem yourself? If you haven't, because that's a great way to validate, is it a real problem or is this just sort of a nice to have, and if you haven't, then talk to folks who have, and that will give you a very clear indication of how big of a pain point is it. So to your point earlier, from an employer perspective, we suffered that, clearly, hiring university graduates and finding them not qualified for the jobs that we had. So we saw that problem clearly. We saw the repercussions of that problem on our business. Same with, say, with the likes of Andela or many other companies trying to solve this challenge. So the point is, you need to either experience the problem, have experienced the problem yourself, or talk to folks who have, in order to quantify how much of a pain point it truly is.
And in your portfolio at Future Africa, I don't know the number now, but I know you have over 50 companies. How many are you at in your portfolio?
We have over 100 companies in our portfolio.
100, sorry, double, even better. So you have over 100 companies in your portfolio that are solving problems across a lot of verticals, a lot of industries. What do you see in your founders or their teams that, how they're having conversations with their customers? How are you seeing people who have the most success? Why are they having success in understanding their customer problems? Is it just that they're talking with them, or are they doing something special to really understand the problems and needs of their user base? And how are they doing it?
Yeah. The most important thing is that they're not just having these conversations, but they're being extremely honest with themselves about their conclusions from these conversations. Entrepreneurs, a lot of entrepreneurs I meet tend to do something very interesting, which is they imagine their ideal customer and then try to serve them. So if their ideal customer is somebody who's like them, is very rich, can afford a high-priced product, can afford a laptop and internet connectivity, etc., etc. They sort of imagine this amazing customer and then try to serve that customer. But 9 times out of 10, that customer they're trying to serve does not exist. And what the best entrepreneurs do is they get out there and actually meet their real customers. Right? Not the one that they've conjured up in their head, not their imaginary customer, but the real one in the field. I'll tell you a story. When we were building Flutterwave, we had competition, and the prevailing mindset at the time, because we were a payments company, but primarily functioning via API, was that our customers were developers. So a lot of our competitors would go and do Twitter and developer meetups and all that. And we also did the same. We love that customer. We love developers. But when we actually decided to look at the actual numbers and look at the business, we realized that actually, for most businesses, a developer was a cost. They had to hire somebody who could integrate them to us. And so our customers didn't like developers, and they were nothing like developers. They had no technical knowledge. They just wanted to accept payments as quickly as they possibly can. And if they were very large companies, the developer didn't make the decision about what software was used. It would be somebody else. So we learned very quickly that our customer was a business who wanted to accept payments with or without developers, and was very particular about being able to account for where their money had come from, being able to service their customer, and so on and so forth. And you know what? We even started to do professional development, professional services for a lot of these guys. We would build their websites so they could accept electronic payments. We would build apps for them so they could accept it. That was our client. One of those apps, it wasn't about what they paid us. They could have paid us nothing, but we would easily run up millions of dollars of revenue on that single client. So again, the biggest thing is don't serve the customer that you've imagined. Serve the customer that exists.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just want to add to E's point on the customers. It's a brilliant point. And there's a sort of different dimension to it, which is differentiating between the customer and the influencer. And that's a big mistake, a lot of founders make as well in confusing between the two. So to E's point, often if you're selling to an organization, it may be the person that you're talking to is not the actual buyer, or vice versa. And to give you a relevant example from a Nexford perspective, like if you're thinking about undergraduate degrees, for example, so if you go and advertise to kids in high school, for example, right, and you're like, hey, enroll at my university, well, the parent's paying, right? So in this case, the parent's actually the buyer. So, from a B2B perspective, it's very often that, we see startups again going and selling to someone that may be using the product. So I actually would like to buy your software. I would like to use the software, but I don't have budget. I don't have the authority to make that purchase. So the person who's buying is different than the person who's actually going to use the product. And differentiating between the two is really important while validating the market opportunity. Because often, again, it could be that the person who wants to use the product really does want it, but the person who needs to buy it has no incentive to buy it, and therefore your business is never going to work.
Wow. Okay. So we're sticking with self-aware, non-delusional founders who are connected to their user base and selling to the right people. This is great. And please, thank you to everyone who, if you have questions throughout, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A. We're going to have time to, in just a little bit, to get to your questions you have for Fadl and E, some incredible founders that are here with us. So we've talked about, what disruptive or leapfrog innovation is, how Fadl and E are identifying market gaps. and how to now we shift to exploiting those market gaps. And I think this is where like the work really happens. And you've identified what this gap is. And now how do you actually turn this into a business opportunity? And it's exciting because both of you have actually really done this from the ground up with multiple businesses. So, it sounds like Fadl, you had the idea for Nexford University, initially starting with, changing, what did you say? Disrupting humanity, improving humanity, and making social impact. What were your next steps? How did you then take it to the next level and actually build your business based on what you identified as a gap in the market?
So actually, to E's point earlier on Flutterwave starting as an API, Nexford was not intended to be a university. So not many people might know the story, but we actually wanted to build software in the beginning and sell that software to universities. So all the software would do is it would analyze what the needs of employers are. So what are the skills, for example, that employers are looking for? What tools, what technologies do employers want candidates to know? And then we wanted that same software to analyze the curriculum that universities are actually offering. And therefore, it would identify what the gaps between the two are. So, if company X is hiring a software engineer, this is what they need to know. But this is what universities are actually teaching their software engineers. And then we wanted to go sell subscriptions to that software to universities across the world. And the idea in our minds was, great, universities would buy that software, and all of a sudden, all universities would teach stuff that's super relevant, and the world would become a better place. And a month or two into that idea, it became very clear that it was quite naive. So to some of the points that we spoke about earlier, in theory, there are folks in universities who want to deliver education that's relevant, but those aren't the buyers. So those who are actually going to be able to sign that contract and buy our software have no incentive to do that. So it became clear that that was not going to be a viable business. And it also became clear that faculty would be resistant to adopting this sort of software because they want to be in control of what's being taught in the classroom. So again, it was an imaginary customer, to E's point earlier. Like it wasn't clear who within universities would actually want to buy this software and then who would use it. So one thing led to another, and we ended up concluding that we have to go direct to learners and actually deliver the relevant curriculum. So it's obviously, lots of phases that we had to go through to reach that conclusion. But the one consistent point throughout, that process was staying very close to, our prospective customers and actually talking to them to understand what it is they wanted, what they would be able to buy, how they would be able to buy it. And, it became very clear to us that we need to sell in the way that people want to buy. I think that was, a super clear and sort of consistent theme throughout our process. And to give you a practical example, why is education unaffordable to lots of folks? Part of that is payment terms. So, when you actually charge tuition, you need to charge it in a way that people can pay for it. So lots of people are paying from their salaries, and therefore you need to make it payable on a monthly basis. So that is something almost as simple as that is actually very different from all traditional university tuition structures when you think about it, and they require payment by term or by semester or even by year in some instances. So by staying close to customers, we were able to identify this is how they want to buy, and therefore this is how we should sell to those customers. Let me pass over to E.
Are you good, E? Are you
Yes, I had basically said what I had wanted to say earlier, and I think Fadl was just adding to what I had said. So, except there was another question.
I see there are a couple of questions on Q&A. E, do you want to maybe answer the how can you mention or give tips on how you identified the right customer who will be willing to pay for your idea or service?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I like to look at is especially in Nigeria, you know, the average person's income is roughly about $6 a day. So because if you actually maybe slightly less than that, but basically because the average person in Nigeria, according to the World Bank, is about $2,000 in income, PPP, purchasing power parity. So if you divide that by 365, you'll get roughly about $6. That's the average person's income. On that income, they can't really do much for you. That's just the truth. I can't think of very many things you would even make for $3, which would give you a 50% profit, or even for $5, which would give you a 20% profit. So your only option is to help people make money. So what I do in my own investing is to identify tools and opportunities that help people make money. And then I can take a cut of that. So in Andela's case, for example, we took somebody's income from zero to over $100,000 over a period of 3 to 4 years. That allows us to then take a portion of that upside, right? Because we know that we are creating that kind of value for that individual by virtue of the skills that we are teaching them. Same thing with Flutterwave, right? We helped a lot of business owners expand their client base beyond those who could come to pay them physically to people from all over the world. And so that meant that their income increased in dollars, which justified our ability to take a 3.5% take rate or a 1% or 2% take rate for whatever they have need. So your mindset always has to be, especially in Nigeria, how much money is this person going to be able to make from leveraging my tool? Except you're selling an entertainment product, in which case you have to be thinking very, very differently about the entire market. But for most things that you sell in Nigeria, you are unlikely, you know, that person who earns $5 a day will spend, you know, 3 naira of his 5 naira on food, right? You know, will spend 1 naira of his 5 naira on data, right? How much left for you and your service? Except there is an implicit promise of it being able to help them increase their incomes. So that's how I think about market sizing, usually from the bottom up. How can I help you increase your income so that I can then target you with more services? And I'm sure that you have the resources to buy them. Thank you.
Can I answer the question? We have a question here on maximizing profits when the market you intend or wish to serve has not yet been created. How do you maximize profits there? So I just want to address this one. You know, it's first of all, if the market has not been created, that's typically a much more expensive, you know, startup to build. And you need to know that, you know, going into that business, creating, you know, demand for something that doesn't exist yet is by definition typically going to be, you know, more expensive. Having said that, I think one common characteristic for folks who have done that successfully is thinking about an ecosystem approach. So if you think about an ecosystem approach, essentially who makes money when I make money is a great way to address, I think, this sort of business. So businesses that follow this ecosystem approach, meaning they have sort of value-added partners or resellers or distributors, like Apple does this brilliantly, probably the most successful example on earth. If you think about the number of organizations that make money as Apple makes money, it just creates this massive ecosystem that's anchored around one specific company. So, you know, between the accessories and the app store and the resellers and the servicing companies and the, you know, the fixing screen companies and so forth, there's just like thousands of companies across the world that make money every time someone buys an iPhone. There's tons of stuff around that. So I think the ecosystem approach is a great way to follow that, because what it means is you all of a sudden have lots of other companies indirectly selling your product or service, and therefore your distribution channels are just amplified massively, and you're no longer relying just on your marketing budget. It's in so many other people's interest for you to sell your product that you have these indirect sales channels working for you every day.
Do you see, Fadl, like who else is doing it besides Apple? And in the do you see a parallel for other industries? And maybe within the African context, are you thinking of any?
I mean, obviously, Samsung does it too, but but beyond phones, I mean, I think even automotive companies, do that to a large extent. Then payment providers definitely do it as well, because they're sort of, pipelines, right? So every time, a payment takes place on your platform, lots of other folks will make money. So let's say there's a company called Fawry in Egypt, for example. It's a fantastic example of this sort of platform. So Fawry became almost the default payment mechanism for utility bills, government bills, tuition fees, mobile bills. So now so many companies. So if you drive around the streets, you'll see their logo plastered across almost like every kiosk, every supermarket all across the country. So imagine the marketing power of that. You have literally millions and millions of spots advertising this brand for free because they want you to pop into their supermarket to pay your bill there, because they're going to make a cut out of that. So you almost don't need to advertise anymore. You have millions of points of sale essentially advertising that on your behalf.
That's great. Thank you. So someone's asking too, how do you decide on what business model would be effective to implement as a fintech company for the African market? So we're getting got MBA Business 101 here, although intro to our programs at Nexford. So, I certainly don't know how to answer this. Not that it's intended for me, maybe.
Maybe we come. I think he seems to have a connection issue. He's the fintech expert, so maybe we hold this one until he comes back. I think he's better positioned to answer it. We have a few on chat, which maybe we can address.
Oh, great. Lovely. I'm sorry, I couldn't see the chat. Let me make it visible. Someone's asking here. Okay, great. We have one from Nkechi or someone who so my question is more on the digital university. The main reason people pay huge fees to go to well-known universities is an accredited renowned certification in the degree, or et cetera. How did you handle this issue to ensure people would feel comfortable in paying for this digital university certification? And maybe this person's asking specifically with Nexford of building that brand. I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but building brand credibility. Nexford's only 4 years old, and across Nigeria, everybody certainly knows Nexford. So how have you addressed that, Fadl?
Yeah, it's a great question around building brand credibility. I mean, obviously with education, it's a different industry, right? But to address this question specifically, to begin with, we didn't attempt to convince people to pay huge fees. So our business model was different to begin with. So we wanted to make sure that we offer something that's actually affordable, and that education where people can actually realize a return on that education investment. So if you're paying $100,000 for a degree, you're going to expect to make $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 as a result of that investment. So when we were looking at the market to begin with, we very quickly came to the conclusion, to use the example on the $6 or earlier, how many people can actually expect to make $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 more as a result of an education investment? how many of those opportunities exist in the world? And they were just so small that there was no business, their business model would not work. So we didn't attempt to charge huge fees in the first place. But having said that, we still had to be, a credible brand, obviously. So, we did that through a number of different ways. First, there's the regulatory side, like, getting accreditation and licensure and so forth. But second is just through showing rather than telling, which I think is a key point for a lot of, startups out there to remember. You need to show data points and show proof of success as opposed to telling people stuff. So you need to show success stories of your graduates, show which employers you're working with, show which partners you're working with. So evidence is ultimately the best measure of quality. And we publish a lot of data around our graduate success on a regular basis. So that's how we do it, and it's a long-term process. This isn't like one campaign that's gonna do it for you. You have to keep on going at it on an ongoing basis. I see E's back. Maybe you can address the fintech question.
Yes, let me attempt to address that. Sorry about the connection. I don't see it anymore.
Here it is. So how do you decide on
yes.
what, did we lose you? How do you decide on what business model would be effective to implement as a fintech company for the African market? So deciding on your business model. Yeah.
I think it's really helpful to think about how, when you're thinking about your business model, is how can you create value first, then capture some of it, right? So no matter what it is. So first of all, if you're doing payments, for example, how do you help the merchant accept payments? And then say, hey, I'm going to take 2.5% or 1.5% of the payments I help you collect. Or if you're doing lending, you say, how about I lend you this car? And then on the value of the car, I will get another 10, 15%. And that's my own income. So always think, how does my product create value? And then from that interaction, capture it. That's usually the best way to do it.
Thank you. So it sounds like people have to really be good communicators to be successful founders, or at least, if not good speakers, good listeners. And hopefully
definitely need to. You definitely need to. Yeah.
Hopefully a combination of the both.
Even better.
The Holy Grail, which we have found in Fadl. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, please do, folks, if you still have questions, and you're able to add them to the Q&A. So we do have a great question that's come in, and I'm going to see if E comes back, but I'll give people a moment to continue to add those to the Q&A.
Yeah, I can take that question.
Fadl, maybe we can talk. Oh, good. Great. You see the question in the chat?
I don't see the questions in the chat anymore.
Sorry.
So if you can just repeat them for me, that would be great.
Sure thing. So this person wanted to ask, why do you think disruption doesn't apply to or work with the African or Nigerian market? They said Jeff Bezos once said, inventions are not disruptive, customer adoption is. And he gave an example with AI being available decades ago, but only disruptive recently. So we're getting pushback on your,
So I think in an African context, the question is, what exactly is it that you're disrupting, right? I think in an American context, you could argue there's an established way of doing most things, and there are existing industries that have taken responsibility for certain aspects of society's challenges or problems. But in an African context, everything is still so early, so you don't really have anything to disrupt. You think about the scale of most of the things that we consider legacy systems, and we start to realize that they're not actually that big. I mean, I use Nexford again as an example. Total number of students in the Nigerian university system, all in all, probably approaching something in the order of about 10 million, right? Nexford, and that's after 60 years of education, right? Nexford, on the other hand, is approaching easily about close to 4,000 students just after a few years of operation. And one would argue that from an income perspective, one's contributions are probably much more than the others. So things are still so early here that you can't really disrupt things because there's nothing to disrupt. You can only help to sorry, oh my bad, 1.8 million, sorry, in Nigeria students, and Nexford is easily reaching quite a number of those and has graduated quite a number of those. So my point is, what exactly is it that you're disrupting? I like to use the case of banks. In Nigeria, there are just under 5,000 bank branches across the whole of Nigeria, right? And there are over 300,000 agents. So what exactly is being disrupted? You know what I mean? So again, I think that's something that we have to take into consideration in Africa, that things are still being built. And that's probably why it's a good place for you to focus your efforts.
A lot of opportunity. I think maybe we have time for this last question here. Let's take a look in the Q&A and the chat. So in your opinion, to both speakers, so this is an inclusive question. Thank you, Igor. What do you think could be the way forward to entrepreneurs in markets where the most spoken language is Portuguese? For example, we have Mozambique, Angola, and how can that business be scaled? Are you finding scalable businesses in non-Francophone and Anglophone markets? I guess too, for Fadl, maybe thinking about like, are we ever moving into, outside of English for instruction?
I mean, from our perspective, we don't have any plans to move outside of English, but that's just the nature of our organization. And we think that to stand a higher chance of succeeding in the global arena, what we refer to as the global grid, you need to speak English. So that's purely, from an educational perspective, but that doesn't apply to other businesses. So, there are a lot of businesses where the actual language isn't so relevant. So if we talk about, fintech, it's a great example, actual language isn't so relevant. So, I don't know about particularly Mozambique or other Portuguese speaking nations, but one thing I would say is, it's not essential for your business to have global scale potential for it to be a very, very successful business, right? You could be the biggest business in Mozambique in that particular industry, and that may be good enough for you. So having said that, I would say there's often learnings that can be applied from one language or one market that can be applied to other markets. So it's sort of a catch-22 in thinking about, do I build a startup that can serve 500 million people versus building a startup that can serve 50 million people? Personally, over the years, I've sort of changed my view towards this a little bit, and my current view is, if I'm starting and I'm at a much younger age, I would rather be the leader on that 50 million person market, and then figure out how do I go from there to 100 million, and so forth. And I think in general, like VCs or investors are happy to invest in companies that have proven success and now are looking at additional funding to accelerate that success in more places, as opposed to companies that are attempting to go after a huge market but haven't proven any success in that huge market. So it's just a sort of a different approach and philosophy, I guess, between the two.
Thank you for giving us that perspective. We are at time, everyone. We've had such wonderful questions, really great engagement here at Nexford University, and partnering now with Atana. We're really happy to be here together. And some of my takeaways that I've been jotting down are to think about how can you leapfrog in your innovations, market gaps, make market caps. Be self-aware and not delusional is my takeaway from E on founders. Don't imagine your ideal customer, meet them and actually understand what their problems are, and show, don't tell. So if you have other takeaways, we would love to know. I think you'll be getting a follow-up. You'll be getting a badge for attending this. If you want to share on LinkedIn, on Twitter, tag us at Nexford so we can respond and see what your takeaways were from this great webinar. Thank you, Fadel, for making the time, and E, wherever you are in Amsterdam or we're in the world, we send our thanks to you. And thank you to everyone who made the time to be here. All 50 of you, 50 plus that have joined. We're really glad that you were here today. So from Nexford University and Atana, many thanks, and have a beautiful rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.